A millionaire abandoned his pregnant wife, and 6 years later he saw his son at a charity event, and what the man did was surprising. Diego Veloso Martinez walked through his company's imposing office like a king in his castle. With each firm step, he was followed by looks of admiration and perhaps a touch of fear. He was impeccably dressed, a tailored suit, Italian shoes that shone like mirrors, and a posture that exuded power. When he entered the meeting room, the board members were already there, waiting in silence. Diego looked at those present, adjusted his shirt cuffs with precision, and began to speak. "Gentlemen, we have goals to meet, and the market waits for no one. I want to see these numbers rising. There is no room for mistakes." His voice was firm, cutting, and left no room for questions. As the graphs were projected on the screen, Diego analyzed every detail. His mind was a machine of calculations, planning, and strategies. "Last week's sales figures are unacceptable. I want a detailed plan within 24 hours to fix this," he ordered, facing one of the managers. "Of course, Mr. Veloso, it will be done," the man replied, his voice trembling slightly. On the outside, Diego seemed the epitome of success and determination. But on the inside, something was eating away at him. While everyone in the office saw a confident and focused tycoon, he couldn't help but think in the rare moments of silence. "Why does all this seem so empty?" Diego thought as he stared out the large window in his office, observing the city that never slept. He had reached what many considered the pinnacle: wealth, power, and influence. But somewhere along the way, he felt like he had lost something essential. He remembered a conversation he had had with his secretary earlier that day. "Do you want me to send flowers to Mr. Franco's family? We heard he lost his father yesterday," she said in a respectful tone. Diego had nodded almost automatically. "Number, send a standard company message and move on. We have other priorities." Now, that brief interaction bothered him. It was as if a part of him wished he had shown a little more empathy, but he no longer knew how to do so. For Diego, numbers and results had always been everything. He had learned to prioritize what could be measured and recorded. People to him were resources, pieces on a board. As he stared out at the city, the glitter of the buildings seemed less dazzling than before. "Maybe I missed something along the way," he muttered to himself. But he quickly shook his head, banishing those thoughts. There was work to be done, goals to be achieved. This was no time to let doubts get the better of him. After all, Diego Veloso Martinez was a man who could not afford to falter, or at least, that was what he told himself. Diego sat in his imposing leather chair at the top of one of the tallest buildings in the city. The lights of the metropolis shone in front of him, but he barely noticed them. With a glass of whiskey in his hand, he swirled the amber liquid slowly, as if it were enough of a distraction to avoid the thoughts that insisted on coming back. No matter how hard he tried to focus on the numbers and results that defined his life, his mind insisted on wandering to a past he would rather forget. Caroline. Her name whispered in his consciousness like a distant melody, but impossible to ignore. He closed his eyes and, for a moment, allowed himself to remember. It was a summer night, many years ago. They were in a park, laughing as she tried to steal his ice cream. "You never know how to seize the moment," she said, with that mischievous smile that lit up everything around her. "Because I always think about the future," he had replied. "Sometimes the present is enough, Diego," she replied, shaking her head. Now he wondered if she was right. The future he had planned for so long had finally arrived. He had built an empire, earned respect, and accumulated wealth. But sitting in that empty, silent room, the future seemed like a cruel joke. Diego opened his eyes and stood up, walking to the window. He could see his reflection in the glass. An elegant, powerful, but tired man. What was the point of having the world at his feet if he had no one to share it with. Caroline was the only person who truly knew him, who saw beyond the facade he presented to the world. And he had left her behind without looking back, all in the name of his goals. At the time, it had seemed like the right decision. He was determined to build something great, and she was a distraction, or so he thought. Now, years later, the emptiness was inescapable. He had everything he wanted, but nothing that really mattered. He sighed and returned to his desk, pushing aside a financial report he needed to review. "Sentimentality gets you nowhere," he muttered, trying to convince himself, but the weight in his chest wouldn't go away. The emptiness was still there, like a shadow that followed him everywhere. Diego lifted his glass and took a long sip, trying to drown out the feeling. But it remained. As much as he tried to ignore it, he knew there was something broken inside him, something that all the money in the world couldn't fix. Caroline sat on the couch in the living room, her hands fidgeting with the soft fabric of her dress. The silence in the house was broken only by the ticking of the clock on the wall. She glanced down at the small cloth bundle holding a baby shoe. It was her way of breaking the news to Diego, of sharing something that should have been a moment of joy. Instead, she felt a knot in her stomach. Diego had become such a distant man, so consumed by his ambitions and his relentless drive to the top. She didn't know how he would react, and it terrified her. When the door finally opened, Caroline hurriedly stood up. Diego walked in, adjusting his cuffs as he balanced his cell phone between his shoulder and ear. He nodded to her quickly, indicating that he was on an important call. "Yes, close the deal. I don't care about the details, just make sure the numbers add up," he said, hanging up the phone with a sigh before tossing his briefcase onto the table. "Hi, Diego," Caroline began, trying to hide her anxiety. "Hi, love," he replied without looking at her, already distracted by the papers he had begun to organize. She took a deep breath. "We need to talk. It's important." Diego finally looked up, but his expression showed more weariness than interest. "Can it be quick?" "I'm swamped with work stuff." Caroline hesitated for a moment, but knew she had to say it. I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was almost deafening. Diego blinked a few times, processing the words. He put down the papers but didn't come closer. "Pregnant?" he repeated, almost as if he didn't believe her. She nodded, holding up the baby shoe to show. "Yes. We're having a baby, Diego." He ran a hand through his hair, looking away. "A baby now?" "Caroline, you know how my career is at its peak. I can't deal with this, not right now." "But this isn't something to deal with," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "It's something to be lived, to be celebrated." Diego shook his head, pacing back and forth. "You don't understand. I'm so close to achieving everything I've ever dreamed of. A child. This changes everything. I can't afford to lose focus now." Caroline's heart sank. She had expected nervousness, maybe even surprise, but not this coldness. "Diego, this isn't just about you. It's about us, about our family." He stopped, looked at her and sighed deeply. "Caroline, I don't know if I can do this. Not now." She felt tears burn in her eyes, but she kept her voice steady. "If not now, when, Diego? You're always so focused on a tomorrow that never comes. And in the meantime, the present is slipping away from you." He looked away again, avoiding meeting her eyes. The silence returned, heavy, as she realized that once again, he would choose his career over her. Diego stood in the living room, a room that felt colder than ever, despite the warmth of the sun streaming through the windows. Caroline was sitting on the couch, holding a pillow like a shield. Her eyes were fixed on Diego, trying to decipher the expression on his face. but the man in front of her seemed more like a concrete wall than someone she had once dreamed of building a family with. He took a deep breath, avoiding looking at her directly. "Caroline, I've thought a lot about all of this. About us, about the baby, and I've come to a decision." She clutched the pillow tighter, feeling her heart race. "What decision, Diego?" I can't go through with this. Not right now, anyway." He paused as if trying to gather his thoughts. "My career demands everything from me, and I know I can't be the father or husband that you and this child deserve, so I think it's best to walk away." The words hit her like a cold wave, stealing her breath. Caroline blinked a few times, processing what she had just heard. "Are you telling me that you're going to abandon us? Me and your child?" Diego ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Caroline, I don't want this to sound cruel. It's a choice I have to make. If I try to stay, I'll end up failing you guys anyway. And that's not fair to anyone." "It's not fair," she repeated, her voice rising. "You think this is about justice, Diego? Abandoning a child before you even know him? That's cowardice." "It's not cowardice," he snapped, finally looking at her. "It's reality. I'm not the kind of man who can balance a family and what I do. You know that." Caroline felt tears run down her face, but she didn't let her voice shake. "I thought you were more than that, Diego. I thought that, at least for our son, you would try. But it seems that power and success are more important than us." He didn't answer right away, just looked away. "I'm sorry, Caroline, but this is what I have to do." Without waiting for any further answers, Diego picked up the briefcase he had left on the table and headed for the door. Before leaving, he looked back, perhaps expecting some kind of farewell. But Caroline just remained seated, her eyes full of hurt and determination. As soon as the door closed, she held her belly and whispered, "I don't need him. I'm going to raise you alone, my love, and I promise you'll never feel less loved." From that moment on, Caroline knew her life would change completely. Although she was hurt, she found the strength to move on, because deep down, she knew that as long as she had her son, she would have everything she needed. The day of the birth arrived, and the hospital was filled with silent tension. The corridors, usually busy, seemed even emptier that day. The sound of the monitors, the rustling of the curtains and the sound of the doors closing softly were the only things Caroline could hear as she prepared for the most important moment of her life. She lay in the hospital bed, the soft morning light filtering through the windows. The contractions were stronger, more frequent, but her mind was elsewhere. The thought that tormented her the most at that moment was not the pain, but the emptiness beside her. Diego was not there. She looked at the cell phone in her hands for the 1,000th time, as if, somehow, it would magically emit some notification, some sign that he had regretted it, that he would be there, ready to face the future with her and the baby. But there was nothing. Just a blank screen, waiting for a response that never came. Caroline took a deep breath, trying not to succumb to the sadness that insisted on taking over her heart. She had to focus. The moment was approaching. Her son was about to be born, and she needed to be strong for him, even if it meant facing that day alone. She picked up the phone again and, with trembling hands, dialed Diego's number. The ringing seemed to drag on, endless, and she felt her hope dwindle with each passing second without an answer. Finally, after a few rings, the call was answered, but it wasn't Diego's voice she heard. "Hello, Caroline. This is Luisa, the social worker. I've been following Diego's situation, and he asked me to get in touch with you." Caroline's heart skipped a beat. Social worker. She had to force herself not to interrupt the woman on the other end of the line. "Where's Diego?" I need him here. Our baby is about to be born." Louisa paused before speaking, her voice sounding soft, almost apologetic. "I understand your concern, Caroline, but unfortunately, Diego won't be able to be there today. He's out of town, attending to work commitments. He asked me to make sure you have all the support you need during the birth. I'll be here with you, and don't worry. Everything will be done so that you won't be alone." Caroline closed her eyes, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to escape. She had prepared herself to be strong, but those words made her heart break even more. Diego was somewhere, maybe at a meeting, at an event, while she was there, about to give birth, without him present. With a superhuman effort, she managed to speak. I can't believe this. I thought that he would be here. I'm so sorry, Caroline. If you need anything, I'm here. Everything will be okay." The sound of the call being ended echoed in Caroline's mind. She lay there, motionless, staring at the ceiling, trying to process reality. The emptiness she felt at that moment seemed unbearable. She looked down at her belly, feeling the baby move, and for the first time in a long time, a faint smile appeared on her face. "Don't worry, my love," she whispered, her voice shaky but determined. "I'll be here. I promise I'll always be here for you." The birth began to approach quickly, and Caroline knew the moment was coming. She could have given in to the pain and helplessness, but something inside her kept her going. She wasn't alone. She had her son, and that was enough. She would raise this baby alone, but with love, with all the strength she had, and with the promise that he would never want for anything. She would be the mother he needed. The labor was painful, exhausting, but Caroline didn't let it get her down. With each contraction, she remembered the promise she had made to her son. She didn't have Diego by her side, but she had something more powerful, her own determination. And that was all she needed. Hours later, when the baby's cries filled the hospital room, Caroline smiled, finally feeling complete. She had her son in her arms, and that was all that mattered. "I promise I'll never leave you, my love," she murmured, stroking the baby's little head. And in that moment, Caroline knew that no matter how hard it was, she could handle it. She was a mother, and that was enough to face any challenge. The sun was setting over the city, tinting the sky a soft gold as Caroline walked quickly through the busy streets. Her steps were firm, determined. Time didn't stop, and she had learned to run after everything they needed, her and Levi. The daily struggle to support herself and her son had become a ritual, a grueling routine that had shaped her. Her life wasn't easy, but Caroline didn't care. She had a greater purpose now. Levi, her son, was about to turn 6, and for her, nothing mattered more than making sure he had everything he needed. The hours passed quickly between work, Levi's school, and the routine of caring for him. Caroline had learned to be strong, much stronger than she had ever imagined herself capable of. That evening, she was on her way to a charity event. It was an opportunity to bond professionally and give Levi a different experience, something that would take him away from the routine of school and the modest apartment where they lived. Levi, though still young, had always had a quiet wisdom, a deep understanding of his mother's struggles, and she loved him all the more for it. The event was elegant, full of well-dressed people and familiar faces. Caroline felt out of place, but she was determined to make connections. Levi was by her side, attentive, observing the people around her, as if trying to understand the world that revolved around them. While Caroline tried to focus on the conversations around her, a familiar look made her heart almost stop. She looked at the entrance of the room, and there he was, Diego. He was impeccably dressed, as always, his hair well-groomed, his posture proud, his face serious and focused on something ahead. But what caught her attention the most was his gaze, the gaze that, for a moment, met Levi's. Diego stopped abruptly, as if he had been hit by a wave. He looked at Levi, and for an instant his face showed a reaction that Caroline could not interpret. It was a mixture of surprise and confusion, but mainly recognition, as if he somehow knew who that boy was, but could not process it. "Caroline," Diego finally spoke, his voice firm, but with something indecipherable in it. Are you here?" Caroline felt the anger, hurt, and abandonment of that time suddenly surface. But she kept calm, controlling her breathing. She knew that this moment was inevitable. She looked at Levi, who was standing next to her, and felt proud to see that he was not intimidated, not nervous. He was just curious, looking at the man in front of him with a serious but unafraid gaze. "Yes, I'm here," Caroline replied, her voice firm. "And this is Levi, our son." She paused, letting the words hang heavy in the air. "Levi, this is Diego, your father." Diego froze for a moment. His eyes widened, and he took a step forward, as if he wanted to approach. But he hesitated. Levi watched him intently, his eyes curious, but without the sparkle of admiration or affection. To him, this man was nothing more than a distant figure, a shadow from the past. I didn't know." Diego tried to begin, but the confusion was evident on his face. "I never knew." Caroline felt a tightness in her chest, but she didn't give in. "You never wanted to know, Diego. That's what really matters. You made your choice, remember?" She looked at him, her voice low but firm. "And now it's too late to regret it." Diego pulled back a little, looking at Levi, who, without saying a word, seemed more mature than any 6-year-old should be. Silence hung between them like a thick curtain. Caroline, with her gaze fixed on Diego, knew that nothing he could say would make a difference now. She had made her choice, and she was living with it, facing the challenges, raising Levi with all the love and dedication he deserved. Time seemed to drag on until finally Diego, still trying to process everything, said in a low voice, I really don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Caroline replied, with a slight smile. "Just look at him. Look at my son. He's perfect. And he'll grow up knowing he's loved. Without you, without anyone else." Diego stood there silent, as if Caroline's words had taken away everything he could have said. He took one last look at Levi, his gaze still filled with confusion, and walked away, disappearing into the crowd at the event. Caroline stood next to Levi, feeling a sense of relief and, at the same time, sadness. She knew that being reunited with Diego wouldn't change anything. He had made his choice years ago, and now it didn't matter anymore. Levi looked at her, his eyes shining with a quiet wisdom. "Mum, shall we go?" he asked with the softness that had always characterized him. "I don't want to stay here anymore." She smiled at him, her heart overflowing with love. "Come on, my love. Let's go home, where you and I belong." And so together, mother and son left the event, leaving the past behind and embracing the future, with the certainty that, as long as they were together, they would not need anyone else. The city sky was tinged with deep blue, night beginning to envelop the illuminated streets. It was a night like so many others, but for Caroline and Levi, something special was about to happen. After so long, something was finally changing. Caroline was at home, in her small apartment, with Levi by her side. The routine had been uninterrupted, but at that moment, a strange feeling took over her. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. She looked at the screen, and her heart skipped a beat when she saw Diego's name flashing. She hesitated for a moment. She didn't know if she was ready to hear what he had to say after so many years of silence. Levi, who was playing on the couch, also looked at the phone and, without saying a word, seemed to understand the gravity of the moment. "Hello," Caroline answered, her voice soft but firm. "Caroline, it's me, Diego." His voice sounded on the other end of the line, full of a tension that Caroline immediately noticed. He sounded nervous. "I know you didn't expect to hear from me, but I need to talk to you and Levi. Can I come over?" She looked at Levi, who, once again, was just watching, with a serious look on his face, as if he knew exactly what was about to happen. Caroline took a deep breath, trying to control the avalanche of feelings that invaded her. "Yes, you can come," she finally answered, feeling a mixture of reluctance and curiosity. It wasn't long before Diego arrived. Caroline opened the door, and upon seeing him, a wave of memories, emotions, and frustration took over her. He was there, but nothing was the same. The man she had known was no longer the same, just as she was no longer the same woman he had left. Diego entered hesitantly. He looked at Caroline, then at Levi, who was still watching everything attentively, showing no emotion. The silence between them seemed thick, but Diego finally broke the ice. I don't know where to start, Caroline. I made a lot of mistakes. I hurt you. And I hurt our son too. I know that now. And I'm here to try to fix what I did." Caroline felt the weight of his words, but she didn't let herself be carried away by emotion. She remained calm, but inside her, a storm was brewing. "Diego, you know I never asked anything from you. Not for me, not for Levi. You made your choice years ago. And until now, that hasn't changed." Levi slowly stood up and walked towards the two. With a calm look in his eyes, he spoke, his voice as calm as a 6-year-old could be. "Do you think it's too late to change? I've already learned to live without you, but with Mommy. And that's enough." Diego was silent for a moment, the pain visible on his face. He knelt in front of Levi, unsure of what to say. I don't know if I can make up for lost time, Levi, but please, give me a chance to try." Little Levi looked at him with a depth that seemed beyond his years. "You have to be more than promises. I've seen what Mommy did for me, what she did for us. It's not just about words. You have to prove that you're here to stay." Caroline watched in silence, feeling a weight on her chest. But when she saw the sincerity in Diego's eyes, she knew something was changing. "Diego, you have to understand that Levi is right. Lost time cannot be recovered, but we can still decide what to do with what lies ahead." Diego raised his head, his gaze fixed on Caroline. "I'm willing to try, Caroline. If you give me this opportunity, I want to start over. For Levi. For us. I know I can't erase what I've done, but I can build something new, if you let me." Silence fell again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was more of a space for reflection, for possibilities. Caroline looked at Levi, who was looking at her with an impressive calm for his age, and then she turned her attention to Diego. "I don't know if we can start from scratch. I don't know if we can forget everything that happened, but I can try, for Levi, because in the end, he's the most important thing." Levi then looked at Diego, and with a soft smile said, "Maybe you have a chance to be a good father, but you'll have to prove it. I'll give you a chance." Diego smiled with a mixture of relief and gratitude, but he knew that the real battle was beginning now. He looked at Caroline, with a look more sincere than ever. "Thank you. I'll do my best, I promise." From that moment on, the path ahead would be different. What was to come would not be easy, but they were willing to try. Because for the first time in a long time, there was a chance to start over. And with that, a new phase began, full of hope and challenges, but also of love and reconstruction. Caroline, Levi, and Diego were ready to write a new chapter of their lives, together. The days that followed the meeting between Diego, Caroline, and Levi were intense. Time seemed to pass more slowly for everyone as tensions and expectations grew. Diego was determined to regain his family's respect, But there were still many obstacles in the way and, as always, his work was at the center of everything. But something unexpected was about to happen, something that would completely change the course of history. One morning, as Diego was preparing for another long day of meetings and negotiations, he received an urgent call from one of his directors. The tone of urgency in the man's voice was unmistakable. "Diego, you need to see this. The company, we investigated Caroline and Levi. It was one of our standard investigations, you know. But the thing has reached proportions that we cannot ignore." Diego felt a shiver run down his spine. "What are you saying? They investigated Caroline and Levi. What does that mean?" The director hesitated before answering. "The company, they did a deep search into Caroline's life and even Levi's behavior. Apparently she has some suspicious connections. It's just standard procedure, but it's been generating some internal comments. They want you to take some action, to distance yourself from them, or at least show that you're not involved." Anger suddenly appeared, burning through his veins like an uncontrollable fire. Diego stood up from his chair and, on impulse, threw his coffee cup on the floor. The shattering of the glass sounded like an explosion in his ears, but the real explosion was happening inside him. How could the company, to which he had dedicated so much of his life, do this? How could they invade Caroline and Levi's privacy like this? "This is unbelievable. Don't touch them. Don't touch my family," he shouted, barely able to control his voice. "Diego, calm down. It's not personal. The investigation is just standard procedure. These are the orders we received." The director tried to justify, but his words were worthless. Diego's indignation only grew. "It doesn't matter. There are no more excuses. They have no right to do this." Diego hung up the phone angrily, feeling his entire body tremble. He knew what he had to do. Minutes later, he was in the meeting room of his company, facing his board of directors, all expectant and curious. But he wasn't there for a common business meeting. He was there to do something that would change his life forever. "Gentlemen," Diego said, his voice firm and resolute, "I am here to inform you that, as of this moment, I am stepping down from the leadership of this company. I cannot continue in a place where privacy and respect for my family are treated with such indifference. The investigation into Caroline and Levi is something I cannot and will not tolerate." The directors exchanged glances, surprised. Some tried to protest, but Diego cut them off. "There's nothing more to discuss. My priority now is my family, and I'll do whatever it takes to protect them, even if it means giving up everything I've built. I've made my decision." Diego stood up from the table with an unwavering posture and took one last look at the perplexed faces of his colleagues. He knew he was doing the right thing. The company might be the foundation of his career, but the true foundation of his life was Caroline and Levi. Nothing and no one, not even professional success, could change that. He left the building, feeling the weight of his decision, but also a sense of freedom. It was a new beginning, a moment of true change. For the first time in many years, Diego was aligned with his true priorities. When he got home, Caroline and Levi were on the couch, relaxing after an ordinary day. When she saw him come in, Caroline immediately realized that something had changed. "Diego?" "What happened?" she asked, her expression curious but also worried. He looked into her eyes, and the determination in his gaze was unmistakable. "I've left the company, Caroline. I won't let them invade our lives anymore. My priority now is you and Levi. It always has been, but I needed to see it for real." Caroline was silent for a moment, surprised and relieved at the same time. She hadn't imagined Diego would make such a drastic decision. But deep down, she knew that this gesture was proof that he was really changing. "Did you do this for us?" she asked, her voice cracking, touched by his sincerity. "Yes," he replied, moving closer to her and placing his hand on Levi's shoulder. who was now looking at him with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "I did it because you're all I have, and I'll do whatever it takes to make sure no one hurts us." Levi, though still a little reserved, smiled shyly. He felt something was changing, that the word family was finally being filled with its true meaning. Diego's change, though significant, was only the beginning of a new journey for all of them. Now, with the weight of past decisions behind them, they could finally focus on the future, together. The following days were filled with tense silence, but also with reflection. Diego had made a drastic decision, abandoning his career and the successful life he had built to prioritize Caroline and Levi. Deep down, he knew that the road ahead would be difficult, full of uncertainty, and perhaps even rejection. But he was ready. He was willing to do anything to prove that his family would now be the center of his world. Caroline, on the other hand, was in a whirlwind of emotions. She felt the pain of the still open wounds, but at the same time something in her heart was beginning to stir. She knew Diego was trying to change, but would that be enough? Could she trust him again, after everything that had happened? One afternoon, while Levi was at school, Caroline sat on the porch looking out at the empty garden and thought. Diego's words echoed in her mind. "My priority now is you and Levi." She felt that he was sincere, but there was something inside her that made her hesitate. The fear of being hurt again was strong, but the pain of the past could no longer guide her decisions. Diego knew that he needed to give it time, but he was also determined. The next day, he decided it was time to talk to Caroline once and for all. The chance he had to start over could not be wasted, and he would make sure to make it clear to her how committed he was to this new phase. When he arrived home, he found Caroline in the living room, with a thoughtful but open expression. It was the moment he had been waiting for. He approached her cautiously, as if it were an important and delicate step, and spoke with the sincerity that only he knew how to express. "Caroline, I know that words cannot erase the past. I know that I cannot go back and correct the mistakes I have made. But what I can do now more than ever is to be present. I love you, and I love Levi. There is nothing else I want, other than to be with you." Caroline looked at him, and in that moment, she saw not only a repentant man, but someone willing to fight for what mattered most in his life. Levi, who was in the room, listening to the conversation, felt the tension in the air, but also a slight hope sprouting in his chest. He knew his father was trying, even if he didn't know how, to earn their love. Caroline began, her voice breaking. "I don't know if I can trust again, Diego. I've protected myself so much for so long, and as much as you've changed, it's hard to erase everything we've been through. But you're right about one thing. Words won't solve it. I need to see your actions. I need you to show me every day that you're here for us, without reservations." Diego stepped forward without hesitation. "I know I'll have to prove it every day, and I'm willing to do it, Caroline. There's nothing else in my life but you and Levi. My priority in life now is our family. I'm not here to just say, I'm going to change. I'm here to do it, for real." Caroline felt a rush of intense emotions. She knew that, even though the road ahead was long and difficult, there was something there, something genuine. She could give him a chance. Maybe it wouldn't be an overnight change, but she was willing to try. For the first time, she didn't feel the weight of guilt or resentment on her shoulders, just the possibility of a new beginning. "I won't promise it will be easy, Diego, but maybe we can try again. I'll give you a chance. And Levi needs time too, but for now, I know we have to take this step." Diego felt his heart tighten, but also fill with gratitude. He knew that, over time, he would have to prove his love and dedication. But this was a start, and he wasn't going to let it slip away. He looked into Caroline's eyes and said, his voice firm, "I love you, Caroline. And I will show you every day that our family is what matters most to me. I will be here. Forever. They embraced. A silent embrace, but full of promise. It was a new beginning for the three of them. A fresh start that would be marked by challenges, but also by renewed hope. Diego knew the road would be long, but for the first time, he was willing to walk to the end. The aroma of dinner spread throughout the house, the sound of pans being stirred, the scratching of knives against plates, and Levi's low laugh filled the room. It was an ordinary night, but for the family, it was the first step on a completely new journey. Caroline was in the kitchen, preparing a simple but lovingly prepared dish. Rice, roast potatoes, and grilled chicken blended into a modest feast, but full of meaning. Levi was sitting at the table, playing with his napkin and asking Diego for a joke. She watched her son with a shy smile, but her eyes, which had seen so many hardships, now reflected renewed hope. Diego, who had committed to being more present, was in the living room, organizing the cutlery and the table. He never imagined that one day this simple gesture, like placing the knife next to Levi's plate, would be so meaningful. His eyes watched the woman and son he loved so much, and a feeling of gratitude and emotion took over his chest. He knew that, despite everything that had happened, this moment was the chance he had to rebuild his life alongside them. Levi, in his irreverent way, was excited and asked about Diego's past. "Dad, how were you when you were a child? Did you play football? Did you have many friends?" Diego smiled at the question and sat next to Levi, looking at Caroline, who was a few meters away, but with a soft look. "I played a little, yes, but he was more of that kind of kid who was always behind books, trying to understand how things worked, you know?" Diego responded with a loving tone. "But even when I was a child, I knew that the most important thing was to be with the people we love." Caroline, who was now approaching with the dishes, heard the words, and her heart sank a little. Diego's words had the weight of a man who had finally learned the value of small things. She sat at the table, next to Levi, and the moment became quieter, more intimate. Dinner was filled with laughter, conversations about the day, and little childhood stories. Even with the difficulties and shadows of the past still hanging in the air, there was a lightness that didn't exist before. The family was together for the first time, not just physically, but emotionally. When the dish was finished and dessert served, Levi, with his typical animation, suggested a toast. "To our new life," he said, with a smile that reflected the innocence and hope of a child who didn't know the weight of what had been overcome, but felt, somehow, that he was on the right path. Diego raised his glass and looked at Caroline. She didn't say anything, but her eyes sparkled with a mixture of emotion and confidence. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but seeing her son so happy and feeling peace in her heart, she was willing to try. Diego looked at Levi and with immense sincerity said, "Our family is complete, Levi. I will do everything I can to make sure you always know how much you are loved, and that we, as a family, are together for whatever comes." Caroline, feeling the sincerity in Diego's words, approached, and with one hand on Levi's and the other on Diego's, replied, "Yes, we are together. From now on, this is how it will be. No matter what the future brings, we have each other." The moment was silent, but with a silence full of understanding. The family's life, which had previously been marked by pain, separations, and loneliness, now began to take on new colors. The wounds still existed, but the bond was becoming stronger every day. They were learning to rebuild what seemed irreparable. And that night, with a full table, a light heart, and the promises of a new beginning, Caroline and Diego knew that together they would be able to face whatever fate had in store for them. For Levi, this was the beginning of a life with the presence and love he always deserved. The first days of their new life together were full of promises and hopes. But soon, reality began to impose itself. Although the love between Diego and Caroline was blossoming again, the financial pressure was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. The life Diego had left behind with its high standards and privileges seemed distant, and the bills began to pile up. Diego felt the weight of responsibility, not only as a businessman, but now as a husband and father. The company he had left to spend time with his family was struggling. The name that was once synonymous with success was starting to take a hit due to his sudden departure. He didn't know how, but he had the feeling that everything he had built was falling apart. Caroline, on the other hand, continued her work as a caregiver for the elderly and also began offering cleaning services in some houses in the city. His salary, although modest, helped keep the house running. She was proud to be able to contribute, but the burden was heavy, and she would often arrive exhausted, only to find more bills to pay and more responsibilities. One afternoon, while Diego was trying to reorganize some finances at home, he looked at Caroline and, with a worried look on his face, said, "I can't see a way out of this, Caroline. I stepped aside to take care of you, but now I feel like I'm failing. The bills don't stop arriving, and you're trying so hard too." Caroline, with a tired but firm smile, looked at him and replied, "Diego, we don't need much to be happy. What matters is that we are together. I know things are difficult right now, but we will find a solution. We will face this as a team." Caroline's optimism, even in the worst situations, has always been one of her strengths. Diego, although overcome by guilt and pressure from his past, began to realize that more than ever, he needed to trust her. It wasn't just businesses that needed his attention, it was his family, and the strength they had together could overcome any obstacle. One weekend, after a long week of work, Diego had an idea. He spent the night thinking of ways to increase his family's income without compromising his dignity or the values he was learning to cultivate. When he finally woke up, he had a plan. "I have an idea, Caroline. What if we started selling the products you make? I know you have this talent with crochet and the things you create for others. What do you think about selling online? I can also try to do something to help. I don't know. Maybe with some consultancy in small businesses. Something that allows me to balance my finances a little, without leaving my family aside." Caroline looked at him, surprised by the idea. She didn't imagine her husband would be so proactive again. She had always known he had a strategic vision, but until that moment, she didn't see him as someone willing to start from scratch again. "I didn't know you had these ideas in mind, Diego. Maybe this is what we needed. It won't be easy, but with you by my side, I know we can make it happen." With the first steps taken, they started selling Caroline's creations on social networks, and Diego started some consultancies for small businesses in the city. Despite it being a difficult start, they found themselves more united than ever. As time passed, the two began to adapt to their new life. Levi, in turn, was watching his parents and understanding the value of hard work and dedication. He no longer saw his parents as distant figures, but as the pillars of his life. They were his heroes, and he was immensely proud of their ability to adapt to circumstances without ever losing love and unity. "I'll help too, Mom. I can make lemonade and sell it to the neighbors. I will get it right," Levi said with a sparkle in his eyes, making Caroline smile. These small gestures, these initiatives, gave Diego and Caroline strength. Their journey was just beginning, and although the path was filled with financial challenges and unexpected difficulties, the knowledge that they were facing everything together made them unbeatable. They were finally finding the true essence of what it was like to be a family. Success was now no longer tied to money or career. After weeks of constant struggle to balance their finances and rebuild their lives, the pressure finally hit Diego with full force. He was sitting at the kitchen table, his shoulders slumped and his head in his hands, as if the weight of the world was upon him. Frustration was visible in his eyes, and he felt like he was on the verge of a breakdown. It wasn't easy to start from scratch, especially after all the glory and success he had left behind. Caroline entered the kitchen, her gaze soft but full of determination. She had noticed the tiredness on his face, the signs that he was wearing himself out more than he should have. Seeing him like this, she didn't hesitate. He walked up to him, placed a hand on his shoulder and, in a soft voice, said, "Diego, I know it's difficult. I know you feel like you failed, but you didn't fail. We are here, together, and we will get through this. I don't regret any of the decisions we made, and you shouldn't either." Diego looked up and with teary eyes tried to maintain his composure. He never wanted to show weakness, but the truth was he was exhausted. Exhausted from trying to keep everything under control, from trying to be the man he thought he should be, and from seeing the dreams of success he had falling apart. "I know, Caroline, but sometimes it feels like we're running in circles. I feel like I'm failing you with Levi. I don't know what else to do." He took a deep breath, as if the words were coming out with difficulty. "I promised you I would take care of you, and I don't want you to be left with less because of me." Caroline lowered herself in front of him, so she was at the same height. She held his hands firmly, looking directly into his eyes. "Diego, look at me. What we have is more important than anything you've built in the past. Our family is what matters, and I don't regret for a second everything we did to get here. Our fight, our strength, it will all be worth it." She knew he needed to hear that. She not only loved him, but believed in her heart that they could overcome any challenge together. Their love was greater than any obstacle, and she was determined to show him that as long as they were united, there was nothing they couldn't face. "I don't regret anything. Not from our child, not from our home, not from our choices. And if that means starting over, then that's what we'll do. Because we are a family, and we are in this together." She gave him a soft smile, trying to bring him a sense of peace, something he was already beginning to forget in the midst of the storm. Diego, touched by her words, took a deep breath and felt a wave of relief take over his body. He had been so focused on failure that he didn't realize how much he had accomplished. He had a wife who supported him unconditionally and a son who, even in the most difficult circumstances, saw him as a hero. "I have you. I have Levi. And you two are all I need," Diego said, voice shaky but filled with new determination. Caroline smiled, her eyes shining with excitement. "Yes, Diego. Together we overcome anything." He stood up slowly, still speechless, and hugged her tightly. In that embrace, he felt a calmness that he hadn't felt in a long time. The pressure was still there, but he knew that, by Caroline's side, he could withstand anything. They would overcome financial challenges, insecurities, and rebuild the life they wanted. "Thank you for not giving up on me," Diego whispered in his ear, gratitude overflowing his heart. "I will never give up on you, Diego. We are a team. We always have been." She replied, with the certainty that, together, they would be unbeatable. And in that moment, as the two hugged, Caroline knew that their journey wouldn't be easy, but with love and mutual support, they could turn even the biggest obstacles into bridges to a better future. Diego was at home, on a quiet afternoon, when his phone rang. The unknown number flashed on the screen, but somehow he felt like he couldn't ignore it. When he answered, the familiar voice on the other end made him stop for a moment. "Diego, how long has it been? It's Javier," said the former partner with a light laugh, as if no time had passed. "I know you're out of the game now, but I have something for you." Diego hesitated for a moment, remembering the reasons why he had left the business world. He knew that somewhere his life would never be the same after his choices, but on the other hand, he also knew that things were difficult, The financial pressure was constant, and he didn't want his family to miss anything. "Javier, I don't know. I'm not in the game anymore, you know that," Diego replied, trying to hide the tiredness in his voice. "What do you have in mind?" Javier got straight to the point, bluntly. "The board of directors reached out to me, Diego. They know you have a lot of experience and they know your vision is unique. They want you to come back, but in a different role. Instead of being bogged down in the day-to-day operation, they want you to be consultant, more flexibility, less pressure." Diego was silent for a moment, considering the proposal. The word consultant seemed much less intrusive than executive or CEO, but still, just returning to the corporate world gave him pause. He remembered the sleepless nights, the crushing responsibilities he had left behind. However, the work was attractive. The idea of going back to doing what he did best, with more control over his life, was tempting. "I understand, Javier, but I don't know. I don't know if I want to go back to that world. I have other priorities now. My family, my son and Caroline, they are everything to me." Javier knew that this conversation would be more difficult than he imagined, but he insisted, "I understand, Diego. I know that your life has changed, but the proposal is not to go back to what it was before. It's something new with more balance. Just think about the offer. You don't need to make a decision now. And, if you agree, we can talk about specific conditions to give you more freedom." Diego, still thoughtful, looked at the table where Levi and Caroline were sitting. He didn't want the weight of his decision to fall on them. Before saying anything else, he asked Javier to wait a moment. "Let me talk to Caroline and Levi first, Javier. I need to make sure this decision will be good for all of us." "Of course, Diego. Do whatever is necessary. Just don't take too long. The proposal has a limited time. But let me know when you make a decision. I'll be waiting." After hanging up, Diego felt a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions stirring in his mind. His life had changed, but he knew he still had the ability to make decisions that would shape his family's future. The proposal seemed to offer a balance he hadn't considered, but what weighed most heavily on him was the importance of ensuring Caroline and Levi were comfortable with any decision. He turned to Caroline, who was with Levi, and with a calm smile approached. "Caroline, I need to talk to you about something important. I received a job offer and I want to hear your opinion." Caroline looked up, a little surprised, but didn't hesitate. "What happened, Diego? What are you thinking?" Diego explained everything, from the proposal to the conflicting feelings he was having. "Javier got in touch. They want me to come back, but in a different way, as a consultant with more flexibility. But before I decide anything, I wanted to know what you think about it. I don't want to make a decision without talking to you." Caroline listened to him carefully. She knew how dedicated he was to his career, but she also knew that he had made immense sacrifices to build the life they now shared. She looked at Levi, who was playing in the corner of the room, and felt the weight of her own decision. "Diego, I know that work has always been an important part of who you are. But most of all, you know that our priority right now is our family. I support you in whatever you decide, but I want you to know that whatever it is, I'll be there for you. If you think this job will give you more balance and time with us, and you feel good about it, then I think it's a good opportunity. What it was before will push you away again. I'd rather you think about it." Diego smiled, touched by her understanding and support. "Thank you, Caroline. I need time to think about this more, but most of all, I want to make sure this decision doesn't drive us apart again." Levi, with his innocent smile and curious question, interrupted the conversation. "Daddy, what will you decide?" Diego looked at his son, his heart full of emotion. "I'm thinking about how the job will affect us, Levi. I want us to be together. I'll do what's best for us." Caroline held his hand firmly. We will face this together, Diego. And whatever it is, our family will always be the priority. Diego felt more certain of his decision. Caroline and Levi's support was all he needed to move forward. He knew that their future would be built according to the values they had now, and nothing, not even a tempting proposal, could change that. It was a quiet afternoon when the doorbell rang. Caroline was in the kitchen preparing dinner, and Diego was in the living room with Levi helping him organize his toys. When they heard the doorbell, an inexplicable chill ran down their spines. Something about the tension in the air made them look at each other. They knew that this visit was not normal. Caroline stood up, trying to hide her apprehension, and walked to the door. When he opened it, he found a woman in uniform and with a serious expression. She introduced herself as Renata, a social worker. His voice was firm, but it also had a touch of gentleness, as if he was trying to make light of the situation. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Caroline. I'm Renata, social worker. We received a report about the situation of your son, Levi. I need to pay a visit to check his living conditions," explained the woman bluntly. Caroline felt a lump in her throat. What did that visit mean? A complaint? She would never have imagined that something like this could happen. For a moment, he was speechless, trying to process what was happening. Her eyes turned to Diego, who, upon hearing what she was saying, approached, his face serious and tense. "Report? About Levi?" Diego asked, trying to understand. "This is absurd. There's no reason for such a thing." Renata observed the two, without seeming too affected by the indignation. "I understand this may come as a surprise, but it is my duty to ensure the well-being of all children. I need to make an assessment of your home and the conditions in which Levi is being raised." Caroline felt a wave of defensiveness rise within her. She knew her home, her son, and she knew that Levi was being raised with love and care. Nothing would take that away from her. "You can come in, but you need to understand that we will cooperate as Levi is fine. He is a healthy, happy, and loved boy. We have nothing to hide," Caroline said firmly. Renata nodded and entered, beginning to inspect the house. Meanwhile, Caroline and Diego exchanged looks full of concern. What were they doing there? What was the real purpose of that visit? Who would have made the complaint? They knew that even with all the good intentions, the system could be ruthless. When Renata finished her brief inspection of the living room and kitchen, she sat down at the table, picking up a notebook. "Everything seems to be in order, but I need to talk to Levi," he explained, looking directly at Caroline. Levi, who was sitting on the sofa playing with his toys, looked at the woman curiously. Caroline and Diego followed Renata to where Levi was. Tension seemed to weigh heavily on the environment. How could a child be involved in a situation like this? Renata knelt in front of Levi with a soft smile. "Hi, Levi, how are you?" she asked, trying to sound friendly, but the question was disconcertingly formal. "I'm fine," Levi replied, with the simplicity and purity of a child who didn't understand the weight of the situation. "Do you like to play at home? Is there someone who takes care of you?" Renata continued, asking questions that seemed harmless, but were, deep down, a test. She was investigating more than simple interactions. She was trying to understand the family environment in a cold and distant way. Levi, with the sincerity of a child, replied happily, "My mom makes my lunch, and my dad plays with me every day. I like spending time with them." Caroline's heart sank. How could anyone question their relationship? She looked at Diego, who was visibly uncomfortable, but still tried to remain calm. After a few more questions, Renata stood up and turned to the couple, writing down a few things in her notepad. "I have all the information I need. Now I'm going to make a report to my supervisor. The case will be analyzed, and if necessary, new visits will be made." The social worker then politely said goodbye, but the air around Caroline and Diego was unbearably tense. As soon as the door closed behind Renata, the two looked at each other, knowing that nothing would be more important than protecting Levi. "We won't let this affect us," Diego said, taking Caroline's hand, his voice firm and full of determination. "I will do whatever it takes to protect Levi. Nothing will separate him from us." Caroline looked into Diego's eyes, feeling the same strength. She knew the battle was just beginning, but with him by her side, she wouldn't be afraid to face any challenge. "I will also do whatever is necessary. They may try to separate us, but they will never succeed. Levi is our son, and we will make sure he knows how much he is loved." Diego, with the same conviction in his eyes, added, "Nothing will keep us apart, Caroline. We'll get through this together." The judicial challenge, DNA evidence. The phone rang in the middle of the afternoon, interrupting the uncomfortable silence that hung over the house. Caroline was sitting at the table, looking at the bills that hadn't yet been paid, trying to focus on the future. But the worry about everything that was happening seemed to give no respite. When she answered, the voice of Diego's lawyer on the other end of the line was direct and serious. "Ms. Caroline, we have just received a court summons on behalf of Diego. It is related to Levi's paternity. A third party has questioned the biological link and requested a DNA test to confirm paternity." Caroline felt as if the ground had disappeared from beneath her feet. The news seemed absurd, almost surreal, but the lawyer's tone left no room for doubt. Was someone disputing Levi's paternity? Anger and disbelief took over her, but she knew she needed to remain calm. This was not the time to get lost. "What should we do?" she asked, trying to control her cracking voice. "We need to wait for the formal summons, but it will be necessary to carry out the test. This is legal. Unfortunately, there is no way to avoid it. We will provide everything necessary, but it is important that you prepare for the process," explained the lawyer. Caroline hung up the phone and stared at the wall, trying to assimilate what she had just heard. At that moment, Diego entered the room, with a tired expression in his eyes, but as soon as he noticed the tension on Caroline's face, he knew something was wrong. "Caroline, what happened?" he asked, worried. She looked at him, and the words didn't seem to come out. Finally, she handed over the letter the lawyer had sent. Diego read it with his eyes fixed on the page, his expression becoming even more serious as he processed the words. The silence in the air was thick, and for a moment it seemed as if time had stopped. "That's absurd," he said, almost mumbling, his voice cracking with frustration. "How could someone do this to us?" Caroline, her eyes full of tears, took a deep breath. "Diego, who would do something like that? Levi is your son, you are his father. No matter what they say or what they do, he is your son." Diego grabbed Caroline's hand, trying to comfort her, but the pain he felt was also palpable. "I know, love. I know. But now we have to get through this, no matter what comes. I love Levi, and he will always be my son, no matter what the test results." Levi entered the room at that moment, feeling the tense atmosphere. He looked at his parents, not understanding what was happening. Diego knelt in front of him, trying to find the right words to explain. "Levi, my son, there's something important we need to talk about," began Diego, his voice soft but full of sincerity. "There are some people who are asking questions about whether I'm really your father. They want to take a test to confirm that. But you know, it doesn't matter what they say. I love you, Levi. You're my son, and that will never happen. It's going to change no matter what." Levi looked at him with a curious look, but also a little worried. "But Dad, you're my dad, right? You don't need a test, I know that." Diego smiled, stroking the boy's hair. "Yes, I am your father, and that will never change, okay? This test is just a bureaucratic thing, but what matters is that I will always be here, with you and for you. I love you so much." Caroline approached, kneeling next to Diego and hugging Levi tightly. "We are a family, Levi. Nothing will separate us. We will get through this together, and you will see. Everything will be okay." The boy, feeling the love and security in both of them, smiled, even though he didn't fully understand what was happening. "I love you too, Daddy, Mummy." Diego and Caroline exchanged a look full of love and promise. They knew that this challenge would not be easy, but they were ready to face it together. No matter what the future brought, they had each other, and that was all that mattered. "We'll get through this," Diego said firmly. "Nothing can break what we have, Caroline. Nothing." She smiled with teary eyes and kissed Levi's forehead. Nothing. And so, with the strength of love, the family came together even more, ready to face the battle that was approaching. The DNA test, a simple and straightforward procedure, seemed small given the magnitude of the situation they faced. He could confirm Diego's paternity, or perhaps question it in a painful and destructive way. But for Caroline and Diego, true paternity was never something that could be measured with exams or scientific evidence. True fatherhood was in the heart, in daily actions, in the nights spent vigil next to Levi, in the laughter shared, and in the promises of eternal love. When the day of the test arrived, the atmosphere was tense, but they had decided to face everything with the certainty that, regardless of what happened, nothing could shake the relationship they had built. The role of the DNA test, although important from a legal point of view, was just another formality, another step that they would face together. Levi, although still young, felt the weight of the situation. However, he leaned on his mothers and father, who had always been by his side, knowing that no matter what the exam said, he would always have his parents' unconditional love. They were his true family, stronger than any document or proof. The wait for the result was agonizing. The days that followed seemed to drag by, as if time had decided to slow down. But deep down, everyone knew what really mattered. They were no longer at the mercy of any paperwork that could change the course of their lives. Love was what sustained them, and that could never be challenged. When the results finally arrived, the answer was clear and direct. The test confirmed what everyone already knew. Diego was, in fact, Levi's biological father. However, this confirmation did not bring the feeling of relief that they could have imagined. In fact, what mattered at that moment was the way in which the family bond was already so deeply rooted in everyone's hearts. The DNA test only reinforced what was already an indisputable fact for them. Levi was their son, and there was nothing, and no one, that could change that. "I always knew," Diego said, teary-eyed, as he looked at Caroline and Levi. "I am your father, and what that means goes far beyond any exam. You are my son, and always will be." Caroline smiled, shaking Diego's hand. "And you are ours, forever," she replied, with a love so strong that it overflowed her gaze. Levi, his eyes shining with emotion, hugged them both, feeling safe and loved, knowing that nothing, not the tests, not the obstacles, could change the reality he lived in. He had a family that loved him deeply, a family that had been formed not just by blood ties, but by something much deeper, unconditional love. And so, Caroline, Diego, and Levi's lives moved on, stronger than ever. They knew that the future would be full of challenges, but they were also certain that as long as they remained united by love, nothing could separate them. And like every good true love story, theirs didn't need more than that. The certainty that the greatest proof of a family is what it lives, what it feels, and what it shares every day. And so, with hearts full of happiness, they lived happily. Did you like this story? So leave your like, subscribe to our channel, and activate the notification bell. By doing this, you will continue to receive our next videos.